One of my favorite components of running a sandbox game is the faction play that happens in the game world. The players get to set their own goals and ambitions they wish to accomplish, but they are not the only movers and shakers in the game world. Things happen around them. Things happen that affect them. Factions can have competing or opposed goals with the players, and that's where the conflict comes from. Of course, the party can ally with factions that align with their own goals, and that's an opportunity for the players to gain additional resources or advantages. But you might wonder, well, how do I make those factions seem alive? How do I show the players that the world is moving around them? Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today we're going to talk about how to make plans for your factions and how to telegraph to your players that things are happening in the world around them. Now, before we dive into creating plans for our factions, I want to take some time to define what factions will gain value from this level of detail. The plans we're going to discuss in this video are going to be most valuable for factions that have a wide-ranging impact on your sandbox. Factions can vary greatly in size, influence, and resources. A faction of 20 goblins in a single dungeon in a single hex of your sandbox isn't likely to gain a lot of value from this process. You can probably list out a single goal for them in a sentence or two, and that's going to be more than enough to run them. Your effort on developing your faction's plans should size match their impact they're going to have on your sandbox game. When it comes to building your faction's plans, you need to understand what their goals are. I've talked about this in past videos, but your factions are trying to achieve something. They want something valuable, something scarce in your world. Usually that's magical power or political power, economical power, or some other scarce resource. The important thing is that it should be something that the players could also care about, or could care about if the status quo in their game world changes. The party may not care who the local ruler is, but if the new usurper is going to start hunting down magic users and persecute anyone not of a particular faith, yeah, that could become a problem for your adventurers. So you need to identify what that goal is. Then you need to break it down into smaller pieces, ideally 2 to 5 milestones. The exact number will depend on how difficult the goal is that they're trying to achieve. Finding a single magic item is likely to be easier than defeating a neighboring kingdom. If your faction can achieve the majority of their milestones, then they will be successful in their endeavor and complete their goal. When you're building out your plans and these milestones for your faction, you should write them out and give a brief description of what will happen if their plan goes off without a hitch. Did you know you can make this video go off without a hitch by hitting the like button, and consider subscribing if you haven't already? It really helps the channel out a lot tremendously. I really enjoy reading a lot of the mothership modules because they include things like this. A pound of flesh is a great example. You can see a diagram in the module that lists out the 3 main events that are happening at the space station. And it describes the different phases that'll happen in order and what happens if the players take no actions. This is great because it gives the GM a sense of what could unfold in the module. Of course, the hope is that your players are going to get involved and then the situation will change accordingly. But knowing the outcome, what the faction wants, will help you figure out what to do next if they weren't totally dismantled and defeated by your PCs. Let's take a look at an example of some cultist plans I have been working on for one of my sandbox games. The Harbingers of the Slumbering Stone are hoping to awaken the last great geomancer that escaped at the end of the War of the Phoenix 200 years ago and went into a sleeping stasis until the time was right for them to emerge and exact her revenge. The cultists hope to learn the mystical powers of geomancy from her and restore their destitute noble houses to their former glory before the blasphemous rebellion. How do they plan to achieve these goals? They need to access the Dwarven Rune Lord's records on the geomancers they once kept to search for further clues. They need to find the Grimoire of Noreen to understand how to break the stasis spell of the sleeping geomancer. They need to uncover the secrets of the elves of Tormenay and understand how they tap into the latent geomantic powers of the region. And finally, they need to find the location of the Crystallis and use their power to break the geomancer's stasis. So these are the faction's 4 main milestones. Some of them can be occurring concurrently, but the faction may not have enough resources to commit to doing them all concurrently. So they'll play out at different periods in the sandbox, at different paces and at different times. Just do whatever makes sense for you and your own faction's plans and kind of run it from there. In a sandbox game, if you have multiple factions executing their plans at the same time, the chances are your party's not going to be able to react to all of them. As a result, some of these milestones will succeed and push the faction closer to realizing their goals. As a game master, you need to be sure that you are signaling to your players. You need to signal your players that the plans are in motion, and you need to signal when the milestone achievements happen to your players. The easiest way to do this is to refer to each milestone on what the faction is trying to achieve and represent that somehow to your players in your game world. The 2 most common ways of doing this are show and tell. Showing is much more powerful than telling. It's much more impactful for your players to see the burned village than it is for them to be told by some wandering villager that river bottom has been burned to the ground. Going back to my example, let's take a look at the first milestone. They need to gain access to the Dwarven Rune Lord's records on the geomancers that they once kept in order to find further clues. How can I show this? Well, the dwarven houses happen to be locked in a succession war, and the cultists are lending their aid to one side in exchange for access to the records once that dwarven house has prevailed. So we can show the human magic users mingled among the dwarves of House Granite Arm, and we can show their opposition, House Ramhorn, having been defeated by clear signs of geomancy. And how can we tell? Well, we can have rumors swirling about the alliance of dwarves and these mysterious magic users, and we can have notes or missives about the cultists inquiring about the location of the archives and its contents. All of these are great ways to kind of tell your players what's happening in addition to the showing tells that are a little bit more impactful. When it comes to resolving the faction's plans, their milestones, and then ultimately their final goal, I like to use a simple tally system. I have a couple of tables that I roll on at regular intervals to see what happens to the factions as the players are playing in the sandbox. What I really like about making rolls for the faction's progress and seeing how it pans out is that even I don't know what's going to happen next. It keeps it fresh and exciting for me too, because I don't know if the faction's going to make rapid progress towards their milestone or if they're going to languish about for a while. I only make rolls if the players haven't substantially impacted the faction one way or another in recent game time. If the players have hindered or aided the faction, there's no need to roll. We know the outcome for the time being. For each milestone, I like to use a simple scoring system. Each milestone starts at a value of 0, and then when it reaches a predetermined positive number, it succeeds, or if it falls to a predetermined negative number, the milestone fails and is lost. Again, assuming no intervention by the players. For most milestones, I use a target of +2 or +3 and an opposite failing score of -2 or -3. In my game world, I have game time pass 1-to-1 with real world time. So 1 week in real world means 1 week has passed in the game world. So I make rolls for the factions every 3 weeks or a month, and that way progress happens, but it's not at too fast of a rate. Plus, if you look at all the tables I have, you'll see that they can fluctuate. Maybe they get a positive 1 month only to backtrack and lose that in the next month. If 2 factions are on the opposite sides of a specific milestone, then they both get a roll that can either accelerate or stall out the progress in that milestone. In this case, you assign 1 faction to the positive side and 1 faction to the negative side, and whichever side it hits is the benefactor of achieving that milestone. You'll also see in the tables that other things can happen than just pure milestone resolution. This can help add flavor and other rumors about the factions that the players might come across in the next month of play or so. New conflicts can develop as the factions move towards its goal, and I like to use Worlds Without Numbers court tables to get a sense of what those new internal or external conflicts are. Special events can change the faction's fortunes as well. Say the faction makes a beneficial discovery. Well, the next time they gain a +1 status to the active milestone, maybe I'll actually make it a +2 or +3 depending on what that special event or special discovery was. When it comes to factions achieving milestones or completing the goal entirely, it's time to pull out all the stops and telegraph what's happening to the players big time. Show them the substantial impact the faction is imprinting on the sandbox now that they've changed the status quo. Show the party how it affects their ability to navigate the sandbox given the new situation that they find themselves in. Going back to my example, let's take a look at the first milestone again. The cultists need to gain access to the Dwarven Rune Lord's records on the Geomancers. Of course, if the players do nothing to stop it, they will hear of the Mithril Palace archives being robbed by unknown assailants. They might see strange signs of forbidden geomancy appearing in the area shortly thereafter. And let's say the cult completes their task of freeing the last great geomancer. Well, they'll start to see her impact as she unleashes her powers lost to a past age on the region, and she'll begin to slowly coalesce her position and power as she begins to take over different areas of the map. So you may be wondering, how many factions should have plans running at a given time? Well, it depends on the size of your sandbox, but I'd recommend somewhere between 3 and 6 milestones actively happening at a given time. 6 may sound like a lot, but it's important to remember that some factions will be in opposition of one another, so it's possible that their actions could wash each other out. And even if they don't, because you're using a tally system, that doesn't mean 6 factions are achieving milestones at every single time you're doing these rolls. So there may only be 1 or 2 elements that are actually worth signaling to your players within your given time intervals that you're running these rolls at. And if you do end up in a scenario where you may have multiple major events or milestones that could unfold at a single time, you have some options here as well. You as the game master have the authority to delay 1 or more of those milestones if you want to space out the action a little bit more evenly in your sandbox. Of course, embracing the chaos can be a lot of fun too, so just do what feels right to you. You can also put factions on ice for a little bit after they complete a milestone before picking them back up and having them start progress on their next milestone. Additionally, if you have factions that are operating so far away from where the players are currently residing and exploring, you can choose to delay or not run their milestones until the players get a little bit closer to their area of influence. Do whatever feels right to you. It's just a simple system to help you kind of design the pacing and the flow of these factions as they're achieving their own plans and make a moving world around your players as they're doing their own goals and their own ambitions in your sandbox. So that's how I develop my factions' plans and enact out their ambitions should the party not get involved in their dealings. I think it helps give the world a sense of dynamic movement. The party aren't the only movers and shakers in the world. Things are happening around them as well, whether they engage with them or not. And as a result, you have a sense of a living game world in a campaign, which I think is pretty neat. Let me know, how do you manage your factions in your game worlds? Do you use similar systems like this, or do you just advance their plans when it seems appropriate to do so? If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help out a lot. Consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.